Good morning, everyone, and welcome to My Jewish Learning's weekly Torah study with Sarah Bracha Gershuny. This week, we are looking at her source sheet on the 12 tribes for this week's Parsha.
Thanks so much, Mira. Welcome, everybody, and Shabbat Shalom, and welcome to a new book of the Torah. So before we dive into looking at the 12 tribes, which is one of the things that this Parsha focuses on, I'd like us first to, we'll make a bracha, a blessing on Torah study, and then I'm just going to say a word very briefly about the methodology of Pardes, which is a way of thinking about Torah from many different angles. So first, let's just tune in and bless this practice that we're undertaking together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And may these words of Torah be delightful and delicious to us and all who we come into contact with, and may they flow through us to many students and many generations and illuminate the world. Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah le'amo Yisrael. Blessed are you, ever-present Spirit, who is the great teacher. So we have this idea. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Thank you. So we have this idea that the Torah can be analyzed at multiple different levels all at once. And this is sometimes referred to by the acronym Pardes. Pardes stands for Pshat, Remez, Drush, Sod, and which I translate as literal for Pshat, imagistic and associative for Remez, intertextual for Drush, and mystical for Sod. But as we'll see, although there are many different layers going on, it's a little hard to say, oh, this one is just this. In fact, I would maybe make the claim that nothing is ever only happening. No commentary is only ever on one level. It's always got at least a couple going on. But before, I just want to sort of introduce that as an idea or methodology before we dive in. Okay, so as I mentioned, we start this week a new book of the Chumash, a new entry to the Torah. And this book in English is called the Book of Numbers, which follows the Greek and Roman names numeroi. In Hebrew, it's called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. But it's also sometimes called as Chumash HaPekudim, like the book of the fifth of the Torah, like the part of the Chumash that is about Pekudim, which is the same idea basically as numbers. It means appointments or countings or something like that. And the reason that this book of the Torah is called Pekudim or numbers is because it starts with a big census. It starts with the census of the tribes of the Israelites. And so there are more censuses later in the book, but in any case, this is how it begins. And in fact, let's start by reading this together. If I can share my screen, here we go. Yeah, well, would someone like to read for us? You'll have to put up your little like icon hand rather than just your hand. Cantor Mark, always ready to read. Fantastic. If you could read for us this first source, which comes in the very beginning of the Book of Numbers.
On the first day of the second month, Adonai spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, saying, "Take a census of the whole Israelite company of fighters by the clans of its ancestral houses, listing the names, every male, head by head. Associated with you shall be a participant from each tribe, each one the head of his ancestral house. These are the names of the participants who shall assist you. From Reuben, Elizur, son of Shir. From Simeon, Shelumiel, son of Zurashadai. From Judah, Nachshon, son of Amminadab. From Issachar, Nathaniel, son of Zuar. From Zebulun, Eliab, son of Helon. From the sons of Joseph, from Ephraim, Elishama, son of Amihud. From Manasseh, it's stuck there. Gamiel, son of Pedasur. From Benjamin, Abidan, son of Gideoni. From Dan, Ahizar, son of Ammishaddai. From Asher, Pagiel, son of Achran. From Gad, Elisaph, son of Duel. From Naphtali, Ahira, son of Enan.
Great. Thank you so much.
I must have butchered at least half those names.
You did great. You did great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so everybody, and you can put this in the chat, is there anything that we can learn? So these 12 names that I've put in bold, who are these people originally? I mean, obviously it's a different generation. We've got Elishama, son of Ammihud, but it's from the group of Ephraim. And we've got Gamliel, son of Pedasur, but from the group of Manasseh. Who are these 12 guys in bold? And what can we learn about, if anything, from the order in which they're listed? And also, Mira, could you give everyone the link to the source sheet so they can look at it on their own screen?
I just realized that I sent it as a DM to one person.
Oh, okay, great.
In the main chat. My apologies.
No, not at all. Mira, this is her first Torah study today, so she's learning the ropes. Thanks so much. It's in your chat. All right, so yeah, who are these 12 guys? Right, Margot says the tribes, the sons of Israel. So who's Israel? Also known as Jacob. Right, exactly. So we had Abraham, his son was Isaac, Isaac's son was Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, and these sons, and Jacob later has his name changed to Israel. So the children of Israel literally are the progenitors of the tribes. Great. So what about this order in which they're listed? What do we learn, if anything? Is it the same order as which they're described as having been born in? Reuben, Simeon, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph. His two sons are listed: Ephraim, Manasseh, Benjamin, Dan, Asher, Gad, and Naphtali. Anyone got any comments on that? I can't see where the chat's gone. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat instead. The two youngest are listed in the middle. Okay, so why might that be? It seems to start out in the birth order, right? So anybody else say it? Have anything? Why in this order? Okay, order of the mothers. Okay, so you might remember that Jacob had originally two wives who were sisters, Leah and Rachel. And then because they were all sort of competing with one another to see how many children they could have, at a certain point, each of the wives gives Jacob their handmaiden as a concubine, and there are two more sons born from each of these concubines. So that is one aspect of what's going on here. Good. So people are popping up with all sorts of interesting things. Okay, so we've got the issue of it actually doesn't follow the birth order. We've got the issue of there's no tribe of Levi listed here, who's the third son. He's the third eldest of all of them. He's not listed here at all. And we've also got the issue of Joseph, who's one of the younger sons. His two children are listed. So he becomes, or possibly becomes, two tribes. So we're going to come back to all these ideas, but we're going to start just by flagging those ideas. And speaking of flags, the next thing we come to in our parasha is not only how these tribes were arranged physically around the central shrine, which is like this. You may want to make it a bit bigger. Can I make it? Oops. Sorry. Here we go. So here we have a picture of what's described in this parasha of how they're camped around the central tabernacle. And you'll notice that we start with Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun in the order that it's described. And indeed, as I've said on the source sheet, note our cultural bias towards drawing maps with north at the top. For the Hebrews, east is actually the foremost, and their maps put east at the top. And as we read in this parsha, the Israelites shall camp, each man with his flag, his degel, which means his standard or flag or banner, something like that, under the banners, literally the signs of their ancestral house. They shall camp all around the tent of meeting at a distance. And then it begins. Those who are camped on the front or the east side, that's how it's described, Kedma, Mizracha, is the degel of the Machane of Yehuda, is the standard of the division of Judah, troop by troop. Chief of the Judites is Nachshon, son of Aminadab. So put like that, actually the map would look something more like this. So what do we see about the division of the tribes here? Are they still organized by birth order, or is something else going on here? Anybody can chime in. Okay, so Greta said, as in other parts of the Torah, the typical hegemony of or preference for birth order does not seem to be as primary here. Okay, so they are mixing up the birth order. Good. Jeanette points out that the Levites are there. The Levites are their own special inner ring inside, and they're divided into clans as well, 4 different clans on the 4 sides. So yeah, Dan and the judges are on the north side, which is traditionally seen as being the side of trouble, incidentally, or perhaps not incidentally. Right, the Levites, so that whether or not the Levites are one of the tribes, they don't get to inherit a chunk of land. Each of in the book of Joshua, the land gets divided up between the 12 tribes. The Levites are not supposed to have land of their own. Instead, they're servants of God who live off tithes. They live off the charity and the contribution, basically taxes of the people whom they serve. I don't know. Oh, good question about the size of each, because the number of men in each division is also listed. I haven't done much analysis of the different sizes. It may reflect something to do with the size of the relative populations at the time that this is being recorded. Even if it's not like a literal contemporary census, it may be reflecting that some are bigger than others. So as someone mentioned, there's so much that we could get into in all of these. This is going to be sort of a lightning whistle stop tour of ideas about the 12 tribes. As you can see here, there's also these words: sun and moon, lion, a ship, a city. I can't even read what that says for Reuben. A unicorn, bull, wolf, etc., etc. So this we're going to touch on briefly now. That the tribes are announced and given. Oh, we already talked about that. The Torah also mentions that each camp has a flag, and each flag has the signs or markings of their ancestral houses. And according to tradition, these are the images frequently associated with each. These are all with just the help of Google image search. So here's a representation. It's not the only representation, nor are these always the symbols, but these are pretty common symbols. A lion for Judah, a deer for Naphtali, a wolf for Benjamin, and so on. And you might want to ask again, what's happening with the birth order or the sequencing of the tribes as they're represented on this quilt? It's not the same as either of the lists above. You'll note that the list with which we started, which Cantor Mark read, is not the same sequencing as the way the tribes are arrayed, which starts with Judah. Liam.
I was told once that there were actually 13 tribes.
Very good. Okay, so good question, who would be the 13th tribe? Right. So Margot says, Joseph. Well, you might remember that in the book of Genesis, or is it Levi? Right. You either count Joseph as one and Levi as one, and that gets you to 12, or, as sometimes happens, Joseph's two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, are both counted, and if you keep Levi in, that gets you to 13. So you have a bit of a problem. Either because it gets counted both ways. And so if you count Manasseh and Ephraim and Levi, then you end up with 13. It's also worth mentioning, of course, that Jacob has one daughter who's named Dinah. So what about the tribe of Dinah? The Torah also says that Jacob had sons and daughters, so presumably there were more daughters. You might remember that the book of Genesis is pretty preoccupied with this question of who gets to have the special portion of the firstborn. The portion of the firstborn means that they get a double portion. So in effect, the fact that Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, both get listed as tribes, as it were, although as we'll see later on, the rabbis try and say, oh, no, they're not tribes because Levi is a tribe. Joseph, he has his two sons. But what it actually means is that Ephraim and Manasseh both become sort of roots of the people of Israel. In effect, Joseph does get the double portion. And Joseph, as you might remember, was the firstborn of his mother. He was the firstborn of his mother. He was not the firstborn of his father. But there's some tension about, does the father get to pick who's they want to be the firstborn? Do they get to pick the firstborn of their favorite wife, for instance? Or is it literally whoever is born first? There's definitely this tension running through the whole book of Genesis, where again and again, it's not the firstborn who gets to be the elected son who continues the root of the Jewish people. So here we have, let's see, I wanted to also, let's see, can I open a new window? There's lots of really beautiful representations of the 12 tribes. In traditional synagogues, you might see also this being like decorations on stained glass windows, or embroidery in front of the ark, or on the garments of the Torah scrolls. These are some of the places that, again, these representations of the 12 tribes sometimes come up, and this is somebody else's sheet I found on Safaria. I think these are her contemporary illustrations that she's made of the various tribes. Just thought these were some interesting renderings. But the question remains, where do these images come from? Why do we think of Naphtali as being a deer and Benjamin as being a wolf, and there's a Reuben being some mandrakes over here, Zebulun being a ship? What is this about? Why these animals or these images? Good. Hadassah says, Jacob's last blessing. So at the end of the book of Genesis, Jacob's about to die, and he gathers his sons together and he gives them a blessing in which he describes each as having certain traits. There's also another blessing that Moses gives the people shortly before he dies at the very end of Deuteronomy. And these, we're not going to look at these passages, but I have put them in the source sheet so you can look at them later. We could literally spend the entire class just reading and analyzing these two blessings, which we're not going to do today because I want to touch on various other ideas about the 12 tribes. But I like how Rabbi Gershon Winkler puts it in The Magic of the Ordinary, Recovering the Shamanic in Judaism, which is a great book, by the way, where he says some tribes carried specific animal powers and attributes, while other tribes were assigned earth attributes, such as trees, stones, or water. And then he lists them like this, which I think it's interesting to sort of dive into what are the resonances of an olive tree or a lioness or a snake or a wolf. Why these creatures, why these representatives of the more than human world go with each of the tribes. Again, it's just a route for further study. Here's the text from Genesis, which you can read later. Here's the text from Deuteronomy, which you can also read later. And you'll see that some of the quote unquote blessings are blessings, and some are not very complimentary at all. And in fact, there's clearly some ambivalence, which brings us to the point that these 12 tribes, it's one idea of a way to say that various different groups are all part of the same family and all have a common root, but while preserving their differences and preserving the sense that they may have some amount of strife or tension with each other, as members of families often do. And it may also be directly connected to the origins of the Israelite people in the land of Canaan. I can't remember where I read this, which I'm really sorry about because I wanted to bring it as a source. There's some idea that, if we don't believe that the Exodus literally happened, that the people who end up being the Israelites in Canaan were originally 12 different tribes, or a number of different tribes, who were not members of the same family, or not directly members. They weren't, the descendants of 12 sons of one guy. But by telling the story, I'm sorry, this is heretical, but by telling the story of being 12 sons of one guy, it's a way of unifying the people who lived in the land and giving them, as it were, a sort of an origin story that holds a plurality together. Okay, so next question. We've got these representations, we've got these symbols and signs, and we've seen that we have a couple places in the Bible. And again, we could look at the stories in, I think it's Genesis chapter 32, of the birth of each of these sons and the sibling rivalry between their mothers. Where else in Torah do we have these 12 tribes described and represented, and how are they represented? Good. Somebody says there's a zodiac connection. Good. We're going to come on to that a little bit more in a little bit. Somebody says, do the attributes seem pagan? I would like to say that the word pagan is used to mean not appropriate or something like that, but pagan really means just relating to the earth, and Judaism is a religion which is very, very deeply connected to the earth. The moon, the sun, the rain, various crops, various animals, various trees. We are certainly a very earth-based religion. So yeah, Judaism's pretty pagan, and these animal totems and plant totems of the tribes is definitely one place that can be investigated, one of many places. Somebody says a zodiac connection, which we will come on to. Where else? Totems, yes, something like totems. Where else do we see the tribes represented in Torah? Clue, it's by another earth-based symbol, or earth-based symbol, or actually earth symbols. Well, we can go back to the source sheet and I shall show you. Another main representation of the tribes is on the breastplate of the high priest, where each of them is assigned a particular precious or semi-precious stone. And here's a written out for you, so you can look those up later too. I couldn't find a nice representation which gave a sort of good summary of what the properties of each stone are, but of course, just as animals and trees and plants have certain properties, so too do stones. In general, as a sort of brief rule of thumb, the color, if you are familiar with the colors of the chakras and the parts of the system governed by each chakra, the colors of the stones basically map to that. So if you know your chakras, then you can do very basic understanding the sort of energetic properties of stones through that. Okay, so that's another sequence of images or symbols that represents the tribes. And again, they're being worn on the breastplate of the high priest is again a way of bringing them together, bringing them into harmony as a collective unit, as the high priest goes to serve God and be seen by God. Also, this isn't represented in the picture here, but the high priest also had these sort of shoulder pieces tying his robe together, like connecting his jacket part, and the names of the tribes were also inscribed on those shoulder pieces. So there's something important about the high priest is the representative of all of the tribes, and so he's wearing insignia that represents all of the tribes when he goes to serve God. And as you can see, at least in this picture, the tribes, the stones are represented as being sort of roughly the same size. So there's again a sort of like attempt to put them into a nice structured format where none is greater than another, and they're working in harmony together. Now, somebody mentioned the zodiac, and I want to ask that question in a bigger way. What is special about the number 12 in general, and what other things in our world are organized in 12s, not just Jewish? "12 months, great, yep. Lunar months, although again, are there 12 lunar months or are there actually 13? There's somewhere between 12 and 13, so which is an interesting tension which is borne out by the tribes. Eggs, yeah, we classically count eggs in dozens. We classically count a lot of things in dozens, and one reason for that is actually the number 12 is a lot more versatile. It's more of a power number actually than 10. 10 is only divisible by 5 and 2 and 1 in itself, whereas 12 is divisible by 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 1 in itself. So it has a lot more versatility. Thank you for whoever pointed out hours in a day, right? And also you might notice that minutes, 60, are also multiples of 12. Those of us who still use feet and inches, again, older systems of measuring are often more likely to be 12s than 10s. Right, we do have base 10 and base 60 in our modern number systems. Well, are they arbitrary? There are those that say we count things in 10s because we've got 10 fingers, but we've got 10 fingers plus 2 hands, so we've got 12. Number of years for Jupiter to make one orbit is about 12, right? Jury, we have 12 people in a jury actually comes from the 12 tribes. From the 12 tribes each send a representative to scout out the land of Canaan, and they come back and they judge whether it's good or bad. I think that I could be wrong. It could be from Aeschylus. I think it's actually from Greek mythology, from the Oresteia, that we have 12 in a jury, but it's something to check out. Right, and then, okay, so one of the things that 12 divides by 4, as we saw with the picture of the tribe, we can have 4 directions, each with 3 tribes in each of the 4 directions. So this is one of the ways that 12's versatility serves us better than 10, for instance. Irene, I see your question. I will try to come back to it. Yes, but I may not get to it. The chakras are not directly relevant here. Yeah, there's 360 degrees in a circle, also divisible by 12. Okay, so it's arbitrary in that you could sell donuts or eggs in any number, or bagels, but people have been finding 12 a very useful, right, exactly, 12 is a perfect square, right angle on all the corners. And hang on, I'll put my screen up again. When we look at numerology, firstly, I'll just point out we have a medieval source, the Malbim, one of the commentators, specifically says that there are 12 tribes because it's a microcosmic representation of things which there are 12 of in the universal ordering of things. I don't exactly know what he means by 12 planes and angles, but he's clearly pointing to some sort of mathematical principle, 12 signs of the zodiac or 12 periods of the calendar, and also 12 permutations of the divine name, Yud He Vav He. So yes, the tribes traditionally map onto the zodiac. Here's a picture for you of how they map. And here indeed is a mosaic you can still see in northern Israel on the floor of a synagogue, where the 12 tribes are represented with the zodiac signs, which you'll notice are a bit different from the signs on the banners. But also this idea that each month of the Hebrew calendar, which does map onto what we think of as the signs of the zodiac, also has a different way of ordering God's name, Yud He Vav He. So Yud He Vav He is the name that goes with the first month of the month that we have Pesach in, the month of the spring. And then, as you can see on this little chart, it gets resequenced 11 other ways. And where each letter is and whether each letter is in its in the place that it is in the name Yud He Vav He, whether it's in the right place or not the right place, and the character of each letter, Yud generally being representative of like a small inner point of spiritual light, Vav being representative of a channel, and He being representative of expansiveness, is a map of 4 worlds of spirit, let's say the mythic world, the mental emotional world, and the physical world. So in the when we have Yud He Vav He, the Yud is in the world of spirit, He is in the world of Bria, or the mythic world, Vav is in is the channel of the mental emotional world, and He is the expansiveness of the physical world. And then as the letters get moved around each month, it's an indicator of the quality of that month and the areas for focus, and which worlds should be bigger or smaller or have what kind of quality going on. There's a whole field we could get into. Another book I like to recommend is Kabbalah Month by Month by Mindy Ribner. It's very accessible English book. You can get it secondhand on the internet. It's really terrific. She has an essay and as well as some spiritual practices for each month of the year, as well as getting into things like the tribe and the zodiac sign and the permutation of God's name and the holidays of the month and the Torah portions of the month. So if you're interested in this this Kabbalistic aspect of studying the calendar, it's a wonderful book. And she's a psychologist, a therapist, and her essays are just very humane and just emotionally and spiritually relevant, I always find. So I'm a big fan of that book. I recommend it. Okay, so someone was mentioning before when we were talking about the advantages of 12 and what can be done with 12. I'll point out also that in the Sefer Yetzirah, which is another very ancient mystical text, the number 12, which sees the universe as being built out of the building blocks of the Hebrew alphabet, which you may or may not agree with, but one of the designations is of 12. This is the very, very beginning of Sefer Yetzirah. As you can see, and we're again not really going to get into this, but I just thought I'd mention it when we're talking about 12s. The 10 inscriptions of the void were made from 22 foundation letters, which the Sefer Yetzirah then splits into 3 categories. 3 mother letters, that's Aleph, Mem, and Shin, that represent air, water, and fire. 7 double letters, that's like bet, which can also be bet, vet, or kaf, that can also be chaf, or pay, that can also be fey, right? And then 12 simple letters, which is all the ones that are already covered by those 10. Okay, so we just have another 12 here. But what I wanted to show is these images from sacred geometry. This is what's sometimes called the star dodecagram. It's also sometimes called the Eye of Ra. That's what you get when you connect up 12 equidistant points around a 13th central point. Here's an even more complex representation. As you can see, it begins to create a very dynamic sort of crystalline structure. I thought it was interesting. I was just searching for pictures. There was a picture of the 10 Sefirot, which does seem to be almost like a 3D pulling out of that diagram. One of the ideas you may have come across in Lurianic Kabbalah is that initially God's creation of the world couldn't withstand the amount of light that was poured into it. And what's said about why it couldn't withstand the light is because it was all one system. And so in this creation story, the vessels that were supposed to hold the light shattered, and sparks and shards of those original vessels and that original light are still stuck all through creation. And it's our job through mitzvot and through study and through human connection and through exercising our divine intelligence to release those sparks and reunify them. But what happened when God recreated the world, having seen that the original design didn't work, was that God created these intersecting parts of what we call the Sefirot. And these intersecting parts were able to hold a much more, the tension and the distribution of elements was able to hold a lot more, was a complex structure that was able to hold more light. So just to touch on that briefly, I think this is again one of the interesting ideas, although in the 10 Sefirot you see 10, not 12, although there's actually an 11th, but anyway, that's another story for another day. The 10, but in any case, having a group of 10 or of 12 that are somehow working in harmony together while each having its own distinct identity and function seems to be an ongoing idea of how to manage things, how to manage a lot of energy and a lot of movement. Okay, so this is coming back to this question about Ephraim and Manasseh, the two sons of Joseph, and the rabbis wanting to say, no, the Ephraim and Manasseh, they're not tribes. It's just that Joseph has he's just represented twice, but he's only one tribe. And Levi's the actual 12th tribe. It's just that he's treated differently because he doesn't end up having like a physical share of the land. And this footnote says it's the 12 that's on the breastplate. He also says, we're here in source number 8, he also points out that the 12 tribes are also the ones that are mentioned as such at the covenant on Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, which is what happens near the end of the book of Deuteronomy. They're about to come into the land, and Moses has the 12 tribes actually in 2 groups of 6. Again, there are tensions about who's represented on which side and who's represented on the other side and who's the top dog, who's listed first. Or you can analyze all these different lists of tribes as showing you something about the different social organizations or who is in power. And the 12 tribes do end up settling 12 different parts of the land, and this becomes very relevant a few hundred years later when the Assyrians, Nebuchadnezzar and co, take out the northern kingdom, and those 10 tribes are said to go into exile, leaving only the tribes of the south, one of whom is Judah. We'll come back to that idea in a second. So here, Sforno, who's a 17th century Italian commentator is pointing out that the 12 tribes are listed at this covenanting ceremony with 12 giant standing stones, these sort of whitewashed standing stones, and then the whole people has to stand there while these blessings and curses are intoned and everybody has to say Amen. This is, you might remember later in the book of Deuteronomy. And there are also 12 stones that Joshua erected at Gilgal. And Elijah, later in the Bible, also erected 12 stones at the altar. And none of these mention Ephraim and Manasseh as separate tribes. So not to get too much more into Ephraim and Manasseh, but just to say this idea of 12 stones representing 12 tribes keeps coming back throughout Tanakh, through later in the Bible. Well, here we're beginning to get into maybe the sod aspect of this shir, which, unfortunately, we have about 2 minutes left. So I'm just going to very, very quickly mention a couple more ideas, because I think this is all fascinating that there are so many offshoots of this. There are, in fact, 12 commandments. There's we might think of the 10 commandments, but something called the cultic dodecalogue in the book of Exodus. Some scholars say may have actually been the original, like top headlines of the things you have to keep. They're less universalistic. They've got stuff like keeping the festivals, but there are 12 of them. Even more, so these 12 commandments are not supposed to be mapped onto the 12 tribes specifically, but the thing that Sforno just mentioned about the 12 curses, the 12 curses are apparently linked to the 12 tribes. They're like the fatal flaw of each of the tribes, and the commentators go on to describe how. The idea of there being these 10 lost tribes who then get scattered throughout the world continues to be extremely potent in the mythology of numerous different people across the world, including in Africa, South America, Alaska, the British Isles. This idea that these 12 tribes somehow represent more than just the Jewish people, or were originally Jewish, but then went and blended with other peoples, and that we're all connected through this idea of being a family in the same soul root, continues to be very, very, very interesting idea that there's huge amounts you can read about that. The other thing I want to mention on that note is even more bizarre when we think about this. Ishmael is also listed as having 12 tribes. Esau is also listed as having 12 tribes. And some people try to read the sons of Canaan of one of the sons of Noah as having 12 tribes. So there is certainly this idea that 12 is a plurality of nations somehow. And again, this sort of idea of a family as being a way to hold together disparate parts and say that they each have their own individual identity, but they're all part of the same thing, is, I think, one of the sort of deepest resonances of the whole idea of having 12 tribes at all. We are basically out of time, so I just want to open the chat to anyone who wants to say anything quickly. Sorry, this was very much me talking and not so much anybody else talking. But I hope that this source sheet is interesting. And I wish we had more time to dive into all of this together. And as you can see, there are many different avenues that could be explored. So, Aglaya says number 13 also has connection with femininity. So the idea that there are in fact 13 moons of the year, not 12, is an important one. And in the Jewish calendar, we go back and forth between having 12 moons and 13 moons. It's also important, I think, to recognize that 13 is a very powerful mystical number in Judaism, specifically that God has 13 attributes of mercy. Actually, there's another class I taught in this some other time. Yes, beautiful. Margot summarizes. The number 12 carries religious, mythological, and magical symbolism, generally representing perfection, entirety, or cosmic order in tradition since antiquity. Yes, Beautifully put. Thank you very much. You summarized that so nicely. So I wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. I respect everybody's contribution and time. It was great to study with you, and I hope that we get to study again together soon, and that these thoughts about the 12 tribes provide the way for some more inquiry. And I'm in fact going to put my email address into the chat, and then anyone who wants to follow up can email me, and I think that's the easiest. Way to continue the conversation. So copy and paste that before we close this meeting. And thank you so much, Mira, for facilitating for us. You did great. And wishing everybody a beautiful high holy Shabbat and a wonderful holiday of Shavuot this coming week.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Rabbi. Have a wonderful weekend and see you next week. Oh, no, we won't see you next week because it's Shavuot. We'll see you the week after next week. Thank you, everyone. All right.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.